So we talk about Smith as a student in a history class. Let me just move this here quick 1 second. So let's just review real quickly here. Again, a fact is a statement that can be verified by checking its source. In other words, in the paragraph or the section, you can literally put your finger on it. Whereas an inference is a statement about the unknown based upon what is known. Okay? And that's really what makes a difference. And again, the reason why this is important is because when kids are asked to make an inference, either from our own questions or from a textbook question, if they have to put the pieces together and they don't see it literally or textually explicitly on the page, this is when they come to your desk and they say the answer is not here. So, how many would say it's a fact that Smith was a student in a history class? Okay, I think we can agree on that. That's going to be a fact. Now, as we discussed in our groups, the statement Mr. Brown taught a history class is going to be an inference because it doesn't specifically state in the paragraph that Mr. Brown taught the class. We don't know that if Brown is another student, if Brown is a Miss or a Mrs., a Mr. or a Mrs. or Miss, or if it's even Brown University. Right now, it isn't that the idea of an inference is a wrong guess. We're using what is known to make an inference or an assumption about it. And this is really what we're into, a higher order thinking, rather than just lifting a graphic signal off the page. The same is true of this one. I always tell the kids it has to hold up in court. And it was interesting to watch the 6th grade classroom I was doing this with turn into a miniature version of a law school because they were arguing their points. It was like a very interesting thing, and they really got into it. But here, it doesn't specifically state that Brown was going to take a history exam. It says he was going to take an exam. So again, it isn't that it's wrong. It's just that we're using a different thought process to make that assumption. Similarly, feeling better Wednesday morning, as the text says, we could say that this would be textually explicit, although there may be a little bit of a shaggy line between fact and inference in some cases, but we could probably make a case this would be an inference. How many would say it's a fact that Smith was a good student? Nobody. So maybe it's this one moment he felt divinely inspired to act like a good student, but we don't even have enough information to know if he was or not, right? So this is going to be an inference as well. Now, how many would say it's a fact that Smith had a meeting with Brown? How many would say that's a fact? Okay, Kelly, why do you think that's an inference? You're saying, oh, Michael, you think it's a fact? Okay, what gives you that idea?
Because it says, at a meeting in Brown's office later on Wednesday, Smith said he felt well enough to take the test.
Okay, and Kelly, what do you think?
So it says it's in Brown's office, but it doesn't say it was with Brown.
Okay, it could have been with Mr. Green, right? So again, not that it's wrong. It's just that we're making an inference that the meeting was with Mr. Brown, which is a logical inference to make. But we can't support it in court because it doesn't stipulate it in the text. In other words, it's not textually explicit, which is okay. We can go ahead and make that assumption. What about Smith missed a history exam? How many would say that's a fact? Well, again, he may have come later, all right? So we're not sure, so it's going to be an inference. Also, when it says the teacher called Smith's house on Wednesday evening, we can't assume, again, that the teacher is Brown, so that's an inference right there. And now that you all have call waiting or caller ID, you can make an assumption that no one was home, but they might have been home, they just didn't answer the phone, the same way we do when we're getting a call for a new auto warranty or something like that, right? So again, the idea behind this is to give kids a little bit of exposure to making the distinction between fact and inference. Remember, it's an inference, because it's an inference, doesn't mean that it's wrong or doesn't lead to a fact. It just simply means that there's a different demand for thinking to understand the concepts. And inferential questions and statements allow the reader to access the text with a higher level of thinking. So in our reading program, we came up with a strategy called Is That a Fact? And in Is That a Fact, we indicate the difference between a fact and an inference. And then we take an excerpt from the text that we're reading, and we ask them to respond to the 6 statements below, 4 of them being inferences and 2 of them being facts, because we want to overload the inferencing, because that's the skill that we're trying to teach. There in your Canvas, there is a blank template of this template so that you can fill in your own text selection and write your own statements. All you have to do is write over the ones that I have here. Actually, I think there are blank spaces there for you to write the statements. Let me just give you another little bit of heads up that writing inferential statements is not easy, because in your thinking, you have to operate meta to the actual text to come up with an inference and come up with your own ideas and generalizations relative to the text. Fact statements are easy. They're textually explicit, but to get right in the implicit ones is a little tougher. But anyway, this template is in Canvas for you should you decide to use it. Again, the important thing is we don't want to lose sight of what we want the students to know and remember. And also, I use the fact and inference activity we just did as a way to introduce the idea. Okay. Again, we want kids to think more critically and inspire their thinking. Unlike these guys, it's always sit, stay, heal, never think, innovate, be yourself. We want to give them the opportunity to move beyond just that simple thinking. So the squeeze sheets will be filled out. And then on the back of the squeeze sheet, the reverse side, we have this sheet here. And you find this on page 78. There is one of these sheets per pod or pair or per person, however you decide to do it. And this is called the Fact Storm question sheet. The activity I'm going to show you now is something called the Fact Storm. And the idea behind the Fact Storm is that we're going to utilize the student-generated questions about the text, and we're going to have the students respond to their own questions, but also the questions of their peers. Now, if you turn to page 78, you'll see something called the Q matrix. The Q matrix is a grid of question stems, and as you ascend the grid, or as you descend the grid, you ascend the levels of comprehension. So the levels of comprehension from Bloom's taxonomy notch up as you go further down the grid. So we use this activity as a way of allowing students to create generated questions. And I also have a Spanish version of this on page 79, should you decide to want to use that. Okay? All right. So what we do then is we have students take a few minutes and go back through the text. And what we ask them to do is on this sheet here, they're going to write a question, and it's going to be transposed onto the sheet. We're going to use the Q matrix question stems to generate these questions. So they can pick a square. What I like to do, depending upon the length of the text, is to divide up the sections so that I may have pod 1 doing pages 5 through 8. I might have pod 2 doing pages 9 through 12. I might have pod 3 doing 13 through 15, so et cetera, et cetera. So we get a nice distribution of the text. For something as short as the Lemming article, it really doesn't matter. But I also like to disaggregate the rows so that I might have per section. I have one pod doing their questions from rows here, 1 and 2, another pod doing from 3 and 4, and another pod doing 5 and 6. So I don't get 40 questions that say, what is a lemming, where is a lemming, which is a lemming, right? So I disaggregate the text and disaggregate the demand for the questions. Okay. Now there are some Q matrix rules here, and you'll find these on page 81. And this again is a way to give them a process for writing the questions. So the first rule is, well, everybody's going to compose their question. They cannot write their own question. They have to dictate it to somebody else. The reason for that is because it's a quality control measure. If you come up with a question that nobody understands, not that they can answer, but that doesn't make sense to them, then you need to rework the question. The second rule is if you write another pod member's question, you can't write more than two. We want to divide the labor so that at least two people are writing the questions on the sheet. The third rule is the question needs to be, quote, answerable within the article. For example, if you were to ask the question, how many lemons migrated in 1939? There's no way that the article is going to give you that information. Okay, and then the fourth rule is no duplication of squares by pod members. So once they get the questions written down, then you check them over, and now we're ready to go. So this is what the FACSTROM sheet might look like. Okay, we've got questions here. The numbers represent, excuse me, the grid or the square that the question was taken from. Okay, now you kind of have to visualize this part of it for it to make sense. So I have my pod set up. Let's say that I have 6 pods. And then the pod that wrote this question sheet, maybe pod number 1, they're going to send their questions to pod number 2. 2 is going to send their questions to pod number 3. 3 is going to send their questions to pod number 4, et cetera, so that now everybody gets a brand new set of questions, okay? Now, the pod is going to take a few minutes, and one person can dictate the question, whoever wants to. They're going to read the question aloud, and they're going to go and discuss what might be a possible answer to the questions, starting with question number 1. When the pod agrees as to what the answer would be, then everybody is going to write their own version of that answer on their own sheet of paper. Very important. So everybody writes their own response on their own sheet of paper. So you don't have anybody hitchhiking through the process. Okay? And then once the pod finishes that set of questions, or once the time allotment is up, then the questions pass to another pod and the process repeats. Now you get a new set of questions. You'll answer those questions, writing your own answer on your own sheet of paper. And then when time allotment is up, then then we'll get a new set of questions, so forth and so on. So you with me? So by the time you get your own set of questions back, those will be the last ones that you answer. And they're probably going to be the easiest ones to answer because you kind of knew the question as you knew the answer as you made up the question. Now, if you notice, there's a lettered question at the bottom of the FACSTROM sheet, and these are questions that are more of the applied level of comprehension. So in the question number A, it says, what are some possible reasons why the lemmings are drawn to the water? Not really in the article. They have to make an inference. They'll use the information that they know about the lemming. And then each of the subsequent FACSTROM question sheets have different lettered questions. One might be, how was lemming behavior similar to what happens to humans when we get overcrowded? Another question might be, where would I go to find out more information about the lemming? Another one might be, if you were a game warden, what would you do to help solve the lemming problem? Okay, so these are questions that are designed to take the reader and the students beyond the text to generate some more thinking. It also serves as a bit of an extra credit question or a safety valve in case a pod finishes a question set first or they have a little bit of dead time, then they can work or chew on the lettered question before they pass the sheet. So by the time the process is finished and you get your own set of questions back, you will have answered as many questions as there are students in the class, because there's a question for every student. Also, you would have answered as many pod questions as there are pods if you answer the letter questions, which means that in addition to the 36 questions I might have answered, I would probably answer 5 or 6 more, depending upon the configuration that I have. So what you notice here is that what you'll see students doing is not only discussing, but one of the things they'll be doing is they'll be looking back into the text to verify their answers. Because again, when you form a consensus, it encourages everybody to re-examine the information. It was really interesting. I did this with an 8th grade science class, and I didn't want to be in the room. I wanted the teacher to run it so I wouldn't take away some of her mojo. And at the end of the activity, she came back to see me, and I said, well, how did it go? And she said, well, it went well, but there must have been something wrong. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, the kids were working. I had nothing to do. And I said, well, that's exactly what it should be, because the kids are doing the work. And all you're doing is facilitating and monitoring and clearing up any misconceptions and keeping them into the process. So that's the beauty of this type of activity. The other thing is, because it's an in-class activity, not dependent on somebody taking it home, I can say to the class, all right, on my number 3s, I want you to write the names of the people who are present in your pod today on your own paper, and I will only collect your paper to represent the entire pod. So because the fact storm is conducted in class, only the quarter papers need to be collected, and they can reduce your grading load by 75%. Because again, you're monitoring the activity during class time, and everybody has participated and has written their answers. The important thing about this is you're building in group accountability, because if my little Hannibal Lecter isn't on task and he's number 3, the pod is going to make sure that he's the one that's getting the answers down on paper, however that happens, all right? But at least he gets it done, and that's the key. So that's your fact storm. And again, what I've included, just so you have some language to add to it for your own questioning, is on page 82 is a little graphic of Bloom's taxonomy, which gives you the verbs that you need to generate those types of questions. And on page 83 are the instructions to how to do a fact storm. So it gives you a step-by-step, quick and dirty, of how to create the fact storm. So you have the Q matrix, you have the fact storm question sheet as a blank copy, and I will post the DRS squeeze sheets in Canvas so you have that, so that should you want to take on the activity, then you have the tools that you need to do it. It's just a matter of following through and maybe reviewing the article in terms of how to work it. But again, the idea behind the directed reading sequence is to disaggregate the processes that we as proficient readers use, to mimic those, to let kids get a taste, get a feel, get a sense of the strategy that they can bring to their own reading. And then the whole idea of questioning becomes important too. And when we get into chapter 10, you'll see some more ways in which we can introduce different study guides. Okay. Any questions on that so far? So again, at the end of the activity, your squeeze sheet could look something like this. And this is where I now begin to do my lecture. And this is where we're reviewing the information, and I'm using the squeezes as signposts for my lecture. So I may pose the question. So here says that lemmings are tiny furry creatures that live in the frozen northern wastelands. What do we know about that now? Okay, so lemmings burrow tunnels and use their sense of smell to find their way around. What do we remember about that? During the spring thaw, the lemmings awaken from the winter sleep and begin to have offspring. But what happens after that? Right, so you get an idea that we can lead a discussion with using these signposts from the squeeze as our inquiry, our point of departure for inquiries about the information. And now because they know something about it, they're probably going to be more in tune with wanting to know more and being more attentive to the actual lecture part of the day, okay? Now, when we talk about a review and extend activity, if you'll turn to page 85, you see an activity called structural indexing. So I have to kind of walk you through the process because we can't do it here. But as you look into the page, I'm going to explain it. What I'll do is I'll give each pod 9 little note cards, and their job is to get one of these words on each of the note cards. Okay, so this is what the 9 words would be from the article or the text selection. We're gonna have them put it on cards, and then we're gonna have them turn the cards face down. All right. So they clear a space at their table. They've got 9 cards. They put them upside down or face down on the table. Then they have them mush them around, and then rearrange them in a 3x3 grid. And then what they'll do is they'll number the cards, determining where the top row is. They'll number them across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then we're going to ask each pod to turn over the top 3 cards, 1, 2, and 3, and their array may look something like this: naturalist, gruesome, and sleep. But because we mush the cards around, every pod will have a different array. So one pod might have tunnels, gruesome, and predators. Another pod might have march, beasts, and gruesome, etc., etc. Get the idea? So the job of the pod then is to come up with a sentence that uses all 3 words in the sentence that is germane or pertinent to the article. All right? So if I were to say naturalist, gruesome, and sleep, I might have a sentence that says something like, naturalists are interested in how the lemmings meet their gruesome demise once they awaken from their sleep. So what they're doing is creating a sentence, but it's from the article, but they have to use the words. So what we're doing is we're restructuring the information accurately, but now we're doing some language development and also using the sentences to build comprehension about the process. And again, we do it in groups so that, everybody participates, and then everybody writes their own version of the sentence that the pod came up with. Okay, so we're getting some language development practice in there as well. So by the end of the activity, what you're going to find is that the group will compose 8 sentences, because the sentences will be from words where they go across and then where they go down. Okay? And then they go diagonally. So you're going to come up with 8 sentences. And then again, we'll have them, each pod will share their sentence. What I normally have them do, again, is they share their 3 words, and then they share the sentence. And then that would rotate to the next person on the next go-around. Again, we're voicing it. Again, we're making the information very redundant, but we're also hearing a different language development to depict the information. So we're actually focusing now more on academic language in terms of that oral component. Okay? So the directions are on page 85. And then the rules for structural indexing are on page 86. And that gets us through the cognitive strategy section. Also, one other thing I posted in Canvas for you is using different kinds of question stems for the HOTS, or the higher order thinking. Right, so for example, this one would be analysis question stems. So describe the relationship between X and Y. How is something different than? Describe a person or situation's feelings about. What do you think so-and-so, why do you think so-and-so took a plan of action, etc. For the HOTS skill of synthesis, see the difference question stems. Think of other things that could have happened if. How else might so-and-so have reacted? What could have been done to avoid whatever that was? Create a new ending to. Devise a plan, predict what will happen if. And then the last one is evaluation. Again, would so-and-so change something? What type of person was? What do you think of the actions taken by, et cetera, et cetera? So these are posted in Canvas on slides. So if you want to extrapolate those, you'll have those too. You can just download them and print out the PDF of it. Okay, so in thinking about what we did 2 weeks ago, if you can think back that far, before your tryptophan overdose a week ago with turkey, we've hit on these ideas of the model, and now we're going to think about cognitive strategies. And what are your takeaways relative to the notion of cognitive strategies and the strategies that we've shared with you in our sessions? So go ahead and fill in that bottom box. I think you'll find this on page 5 in Reader Part 1. Okay, I can't see most of you, so I'm going to assume you pretty much got it filled out, so we'll move on. Oh, we got a brain break here. Are you ready? Brad, hey, someone broke into my house and stole all my lamps. Yeah, you must have been delighted. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Okay. All right. Tonight we have some time for some IQ karaoke. So I'm going to have you sign up in the chat. So we'll have get that rolling here. And you have your Vodka text with you. Then, so let's see, I got. Room for a couple more. Anybody's interested? We'll have one more chance next week. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Share with us your edition of the book and the page number so we can locate the quote. And then get my book here, and then we'll go ahead and start. So let's start with first one in, Karen Gonzalez.
Hi, Professor. I apologize for my camera. I'm sick and I do not look well.
Okay, we will justify that.
The book that I have is the 12th edition, page 309, where it talks about Cornell notes.
Okay.
And the paragraph, or what I wrote was, the quote is, to prep for the lesson, each student was assigned to use Cornell note-taking technique to record the important information, write questions for their class, practice reading their notes, and reflect on the questions they might be asked about the material. The Cornell concept is based on reworking the information in a question and answer format. This employs high-level thinking as the student thinks back from what they are learning and tries to reformat their knowledge into questions. So I chose this paragraph for a couple of reasons. The first one is many, many years ago in high school, I remember taking Cornell notes and I didn't understand why. It actually frustrated me a lot as an English language learner. But after reading this paragraph, it makes a lot more sense and I actually appreciate it. And I think it's very important for students because the way it works is you write your notes that you take in class, and then you have to think one of the ways you can work with Cornell notes is thinking of how to rewrite your notes in question format. So you would write questions that would relate to your notes, and then summarize at the very end of your page. I'm still a little confused by it, but I think that's the main concept of it. But now I appreciate it more from reading this paragraph.
Yeah. When you were using them, were you in an Avid program by chance?
No, it was actually in my English classes. I think that's what it was.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
So you made a couple of important points there. One is it provides more opportunities to process the information, and of course, self-questioning is one of those strategies that we want people to do as well. I think Kalia, you said you were in Avid. Remember using Cornell Notes in that program?
Yeah, we used it like literally every week. We would have to turn in Cornell notes at the end of the week, and from each class. So yeah, it was something that I learned from for 4 years of high school and had to turn in every week, and they worked great. Yeah.
So when you used it, was it with every class or just the Avid program? You did it with every
we had to take notes in every class in Cornell style,
Okay.
and then we had to turn those into Avid. So we would use it for math, English,
right.
everything. Yeah.
Okay, so you both have kind of led me to an important point that I like to make, and that is 2 points, really. One is we can't assume that kids really know how to take notes for a particular subject area. And every subject area, although Cornell is a fairly uniform process, there may be slight tweaks in how we would do it depending upon the class that we're taking or teaching. So the one thing is we can't assume that kids know how to take notes. And oftentimes we find that they're left to their own devices. The other point is that I'm a big advocate of every teacher showing students how to take notes in every class that they have, because the demands for taking notes are going to be different from subject area to subject area. And I don't know how many teachers spend time dedicating time to that, but it's an important thing. And once kids have a model for how to take notes, then they can make their own adaptations of their own deviations. But at least they have something to work with, because everybody will find something that works for them. Cornell work may work for everybody, but it may not work for everybody too. So, but I think it's important to at least give them some sort of schema for how to take notes in your particular subject area, and then give them that advantage. Okay? All right, thank you. Okay, let's see. We have next have Michelle.
Yes. Yes. Sorry for like this, Miss Millie. But so I basically did a VACA chapter 10 of studying text, where I did like a quote from page 330.
And are you in the 10th edition?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
So in this case, I did a good summary. In page 330, I said, a good summary often reflects the process of writing and rewriting. Teaching students how to write a polished summary is often a neglected aspect of instructions. And that one, I agree with this because it reflects to me and also for like the other students. The reason why is because because we have been trained or learned that making mistakes and learning how to overcome or solve them is the best way to make the students succeed. But in this case, we all learned that making mistakes needs to help us thrive. Yes?
Yep.
Yeah. And in this case, that we want to help the students to understand how to write a neatly polished summary. Because I recall how summaries are required to help the students memorize the plot of the stories, especially in my English classes or history classes. However, the teachers did not teach the students about how to write the perfect summaries. Basically, it led to like the students writing too much unnecessary detail. Instead, as a future teacher, I could not allow this to happen. Because I thought the textbook, and then when I read the textbook, VACA, it mentioned an interesting method. You could have like a summary made by the teacher or author, and then compare it with the students' summaries. And then you could have like 3 examples, like one good, one average, one it's there. And the students can compare in the discussion groups. And this can help the students understand what the details can be required or what is unnecessary. And it can thus improve their comprehension or understanding of the main concept.
So I think you're onto something here, and I like I always suggest making different examples and having them discuss which one is the most effective.
Yes.
Because, like you say, one of the things that a lot of kids don't understand is in writing a summary, it's really more general and not detail specific. But they tend to want to get the details in because that's what the expectation is in their head, that they have to get everything in. So next week, I'm going to share with you a format for how to generate the beginning of the summary. But I also would stipulate to you that in the paraphrase of the quick write is really a good place to start because that will lead to a summary. So when you're generating a summary, you have the focus in the area, and that way you can then extend out and determine which details need to be left out and which can be included. And the paraphrase will usually dictate that. And also, you can use the words that you've chosen as a way of building that summary up as well. So there's different ways we can scaffold that. Next week, I'll share with you another way that a teacher that I work with used to structure how to get students to initiate a summary. So, but that was good. So, Michelle, you're right on the money.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Kevin Lynn.
Hello. So sorry about my camera. It's not working anymore. Also, I kind of forgot to put the page numbers, and I left my book in my office. So
Okay. Just tell us
where
what
it talks about the section that talks about graphic organizers.
Okay. We look at. Okay. Go ahead.
So graphic organizers are visual displays that help the learners comprehend and retain textual information, important information. That stood out for me just because one of my main jobs is to really support kids with IEPs
Right.
and implement their accommodations within the lessons. And one of the main ones that pops up is guided notes / graphic organizers. And I always end up making like all these different kinds of organizers because some kids, it's like, why so many boxes? It's freaking me out. It's making me feel to make me overthink. Why so many boxes? Can we make this simpler? So it just, for me, it's like, okay, if it's supposed to help people learn to comprehend and hold information, it makes me question, like, is a unit worth of a graphic organizer too much for some kids? Not just with IEPs, but in general. Also, I notice like some kids, they see a graphic organizer and they get bored. They see, why am I doing this? This is what we're gonna do. So it makes me just realize how effective is graphic organizers compared to like a summary or just a simple note catcher, like stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good question. Anybody want to respond to Kevin before I do? Any thoughts? Okay, so let me give you a couple of ideas, the way that I look at it anyway. First of all, graphic organizers have a lot of flexibility in terms of how they're used. For example, if I'm doing a lecture or an explanation of something, I can use graphic organizers and I build it out during the lecture so that we can actually see the connections that I'm making. And that way it becomes a little bit more organic for the kids, so they see it as a developmental process. The other thing that could be a strength of graphic organizers is that a lot of kids are not effective at note-taking for a lot of different reasons. It could be a part of the aspect of their IEP or anything like that. So graphic organizers basically provide a simplified way of allowing kids to take notes. Now, when it comes to overwhelming them, that's easy to do. So I recommend really taking a section of the text and again determining what size of a chunk they can handle and focusing your graphic organizer on that part and then building it out from there to the next section to the next, so that if they see it in terms of being progressive as opposed to just a lot of boxes and lines or whatever structure that you're using. The other possibility with graphic organizers too is I can also use illustrations, and some kids are very good at bringing in that right brain processing and displaying things graphically. So it could be a combination of images and graphics that they utilize as well. But again, the idea behind the graphic organizer is thinking through the process of what needs to go where, and that is what enhances their comprehension. But I agree with you, it's easy to overwhelm them. So we can size it up and do a basic one and then fill in details later using that same graphic organizer, so that we're not overtaxing their memory or breaking those spider webs, so to speak. Okay, does that make sense? That's why I think that graphic organizers can be very effective and again have a lot of flexibility. Okay, next up to bat is Mike. Mike, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I actually just put into the text, the chat, that I had also done a quote about the graphic organizers on page 297. I'm in the 13th edition. But one of the things I liked, the quote was that closely associated with the use of graphic organizers is an instructional scaffold that involves questioning. Graphic organizers and questions related to them go hand in hand. I like this quote in this section because it provides a framework for problem solving that I believe is applicable not just in studying a text, but in solving problems in a variety of circumstances. And so the next page after that had a list of like all these different kinds of questions. And for me, where I teach music, that same strategy, while not necessarily written out, is exactly how we would think about analyzing problems in music. And really it could be analyzing problems in any subject at all.
Yeah.
You know, what's the problem? Where is it from? Who's got it? How do we solve it? It's kind of what we do on a daily basis. And so I really like to how almost using the graphic format as a way to teach that skill. And what I wrote was the last sentence I had written in my thing was teaching students how to look for the issue, then offer solutions teaches them critical thinking skills. So I think that's good in any subject.
Okay, good. So go back into your readers, reader part 2, and open it to page 11. So on pages 11, 12, and 13, you have the lines of inquiry relative to the pattern of the text that you're using. And you may be able to flex one pattern into a different kind of text as you see fit. It depends on how you want to analyze the text with your students. But those lines of inquiry are there in linear fashion, but there's no reason why you couldn't use a display such as a graphic organizer to do the same thing. It's just a little less intimidating. But this is how you would engage them in unpacking the text based upon the pattern of the text that you're using. So you have those there as a resource as well. Okay? All right. Let's go to Malia.
Yeah. So mine is from the 10th edition. I've chosen a quote from page 341. It says the application of note-taking procedure to reading tasks across content areas. We suggest that students write notes in a variety of forms, such as learning logs, study cards, or on their computers. And I expressed that notes can be done many different ways, and reading logs are used for organization and synthesizing information. Notes are to point out key details and to gain information, and Cornell Notes is another note-taking procedure used to learn important information. By utilizing Cornell Notes, it provides students to come up with essential questions reflecting back on their notes. And in order to retain information, it is best to use small phrases rather than full sentences. This note-taking procedure discourages students from long sentences, so this provides a study guide framework that helps students better comprehend text. That's right.
Yeah, you point to an interesting problem. We talked about this a little bit in the technology session, but when kids are using laptops, there's a tendency for them to be courtroom transcribers and try to write on everything verbatim that the instructor says. And sometimes they can't divorce themselves from the task, depending, too, on how well they are able to keyboard or type, on a device. When we're taking notes, we're in the manner that you described, we're being selective in terms of the information we want to capture, which will then land in the spider webs as a reference point, so that when we go back and reaccess the text, then we know a little bit more about where to go to find what we're looking for. And that's why note taking is a critical thing. It's a way of processing information. But again, when we try to process whole sentences at a time, we may be overtaxing short-term memory, in which means information will be forgotten and erased. So we want to make sure that we give students a viable means, or at least a model of how to take effective notes. And it could be showing them phrases or words or very short, choppy, cryptic types of sentences that would work for them. But again, just so they have a process that they can fall back on, I think is the important thing here. Okay, thank you. Luis.
Hello. My book is from the first edition, page 346. And the quote I chose, it says, a study guide based on text patterns helps students perceive and use the major text relationships that predominate in the reading material. And then for my reflection, I said, taking notes is important because it serves as a review for an upcoming exam. Taking notes can be transferred into a guide because the study guide points out important information that will be needed for the exam. Also, when students read, they write down what they think is important. The bigger picture here is to also identify the most important topic that is being read in a paragraph or a section. If the student reads carefully, they can see what the author is trying to convey in each sentence. Hence, the information can be useful to create a study guide. I would, to some extent, implement this in my classroom because it will help my students create a study guide for an exam. And the reason why I would say that is because most people, when they write study guides, they just tend to memorize facts instead of actually writing down what is supposed to be meaningful to the student. I also would like to address this to my students and tell them that they should make a study guide in a fun way instead of making a study guide that just makes them memorize facts.
And you make a really good point there. So there's a couple of things I want to add to that about the efficacy of study guides. First of all, if you look if you're kind of in the area, so if you look at page 347, what we're looking at here, first of all, going back to the text pattern idea, you have those lines of inquiry that actually could use in the construction of a study guide already built in. All you have to do basically is plug in more specific terminology regarding the text that they're studying. But also a couple of variations of that. The 3-level study guide is one of my favorites. And the idea behind a 3-level guide is that you tap into all different levels of comprehension when you construct those. And it doesn't necessarily have to be one section for literal, one section for inferential, one section for applied, but you can mix and match depending upon the idea or the information that you want them to pull from the text. But my absolute favorite is if you turn to page 349, you'll see, and this is, I don't know what edition you're in the 10th edition, this is 349. It's probably nearby in the subsequent editions, but this is a reading roadmap. It's basically a study guide. It's like a GPS for guiding kids through how to access text. And in this reading roadmap, you have a lot of options here. You can use text pattern questions. You can drop in 3-level study guide questions. If you want to really make it comprehensive, you can also throw in prompts from questioning the author and question answer response from way back when in chapter 7. So this would be a really comprehensive study guide to really scaffold the instruction for kids, particularly our more novice students. And it could be that we even get as specific as to ask them to stop and reread a paragraph before answering a question. I mean, we can really be specific here and be that literal GPS in terms of guiding them in terms of how to access and read and even steps to solving a problem if it were a math study guide. So there are a lot of different opportunities here to engage them with a lot of support. And again, this could be done individually. It could be done in a group format. A lot of different ways to get this, but the more structure we can give them in getting them to access the text, then the more likely that they'll be able to comprehend what's in there. Okay? All right. Thank you, Luis. And Giselle, you're going to, I think, wrap it up. I think I got everybody. So, Giselle, you're on.
1 second.
While she's going, did I miss anybody? No? Okay, good.
So just so you guys know, you're probably going to be hearing my dogs running around in the background.
That's okay. Maybe he wants to say a word.
Yeah, maybe. So my version is the 9th edition.
That's right.
Yes, sorry about that. It is page 316, and the quote that I have is showing students how to write different types of notes. Begins with assessment, leads to awareness and knowledge, building, modeling, and practice, and culminates in application. So I felt like this quote was very important because I know that we had mentioned that sometimes Cornell notes are like the most common notes that everyone does, but it doesn't always work for all students. And I know this also from experience, and a lot of students have a difficult time trying to adapt to like certain notes, and because it doesn't work for them, they're just like straight out copying from whatever the teacher is projecting. So I think it's important to suggest multiple types of forms of notes that students can feel comfortable with, since there is a lot of diversity in the classroom, a lot of IEPs sometimes, and because there's different learners, visual learners, it's just all different. And as a teacher, it's no one in the classroom is necessarily telling you like, well, you can't do this and you can't do that. So as a teacher to the students, I think it's important to tell them, well, you can do this way, and this way, and not just give them one direction. Because if not, then they're not going to be able to apply those concepts, not only in our classroom, but I like to think outside of the classroom. Like, how is me telling him to only do it this way or them to only do it this way going to help them? It's not going to help them academically, and especially not creatively.
Yeah, and I think you're right on the money about giving them different options. I think what will benefit students the most is to give them like a basic model of some kind. And then from there, we can show them different ways to deviate. Some of them might want to use illustrations, for example, or different ways of addressing the content. But again, as long as they have something to hang on to begin with, because a lot of times we assume that kids know how to take notes, and many of them have never been shown how to take notes, so they're kind of left with their own devices, and you've got something that's all over the place. But as long as we give them at least a basic structure, and then they can make deviations as they see fit to make those decisions, it gives them a little bit more locus of control and agency as well. So I think that I agree with you that there isn't one size fits all type of note taking, but again, the more we can provide options that support that, then the better it will be for them.
I
Okay.
agree. And sorry, just to close before everything, I do want to address that. Like as teachers, we're going to get so many diverse learners, and I currently work with middle schoolers, and I give them the opportunity to do a journal, and I don't tell them how to write it. And I have one student who, she does have autism. She deals with a lot of stuff at home, and her way of writing is drawing. Yeah. And she, spills out her emotions that way. So I think that's just, something I want to throw in there to consider.
Yeah, and a lot of our kids, maybe struggling readers, are surprisingly adept at being artistic. So we want to use that as an asset. And, of course, they're going to feel good about that, too. So we can't rule that out. This is why I say, graphic organizers, you can mix words and phrases and illustrations. And I try to use illustrations in my own work with my reading programs as well. So, okay. All right. Well, so that brings us to the end of the evening for tonight. Couple things. Next week, IQ will be Chapter 9 in Baca. Okay. And again, want to make sure that your folders are complete. Late assignments get half credit, so you got to make sure that that folder gets filled up. Again, the 12th, rather the 15th will be when everything is due. Our last session will be next Thursday night, same time, same station. So I will see you all then. I need to have you do me a favor before you depart the room, though. Would you please put your name in the chat? So I have to double check the roll tonight. And with that, I want to wish you all a good week, and I will look forward to seeing you when we wrap everything up on next week's session. Thank you all, everybody, and have a good night. Stay safe and stay healthy. All the best.